The glow from Mark Peterson's house spilled across his perfect lawn and touched the edge of my neglected one. It was the annual Maple Creek block party. His party. And from my dark porch, I could hear the symphony of his success. The cheerful clinking of glasses. The bursts of easy laughter. The soft jazz music weaving through the warm Ohio air. He was in his element. The king of his manicured, quarter-acre kingdom. He was probably holding court by the state-of-the-art grill, flipping Wagyu burgers and telling some charming story. His wife, Jessica, would be gliding through the crowd, her smile as bright and flawless as a diamond on her finger. The perfect couple. In the perfect house. Living the perfect life. From my shadows, I watched them. I felt the familiar knot of inadequacy twist in my gut, the one that tightened every time Mark gave me that pitying, friendly smile. He thinks I'm just a sad, overworked guy next door. The one with the peeling paint on his fence and the 10-year-old sedan. He's not wrong. But he thinks the worst I can do is get drunk and make a scene. He thinks the worst I can do is show them the pictures. He's wrong. Revenge isn't in a photograph. It's on its way. In a few minutes, a car will turn onto the street. A car that doesn't belong here. And it will deliver a truth much uglier than infidelity. That was tonight. But this story doesn't start here. It starts 6 weeks ago. On a Tuesday that was just like any other Tuesday. 6 weeks ago. My world was just gray. It was the color of the cubicle walls of my software engineering job. It was the color of the cold coffee I'd forget on my desk. It was the color of the fatigue that settled deep in my bones. By the time I navigated the Columbus traffic and pulled into my driveway in Maple Creek. Maple Creek. The name itself sounded pleasant, wholesome. And it was. On the surface. We moved here 3 years ago. Sarah and I. Chasing the suburban dream. Good schools. Safe streets. White picket fences. We got all of it. What the brochure doesn't tell you about is the pressure. It's a quiet, crushing pressure to conform. To keep up. The pressure was in the synchronized hum of lawnmowers at 9 a.m. sharp every Saturday. It was in the identical, seasonal wreaths that appeared on every door within the same week. And it was personified in my next-door neighbor, Mark Peterson. Mark was the unofficial mayor of Maple Creek. Officially, he was the president of the Homeowners Association, a role he took with the seriousness of a world leader. He was a successful real estate agent, and his own home was his best advertisement. The lawn was a carpet of impossible green. The flowers in his garden beds were arranged by color. His SUV was always freshly washed, gleaming in the driveway like a trophy. My house, by contrast, felt tired. It was sinking into a state of benign neglect, a direct reflection of my own exhaustion. I always had a plan to fix the peeling paint on the fence, to reseed the patchy lawn, to finally clean the gutters. But those plans always got pushed to next weekend, a mythical time that never arrived. My job was demanding. A new project had me working 12-hour days, my mind a tangle of code and deadlines. When I got home, all I had the energy for was a microwave dinner and a few numb hours in front of the TV. Sarah felt it. The distance between us had grown from a crack into a chasm. Liam. Mark mentioned the fence again today. She said that Tuesday evening. She wasn't looking at me. She was stirring a pot of pasta on the stove, her back rigid. What did he say? I asked, unlacing my work shoes. The relief of taking them off was the best part of my day. Oh, you know, she sighed. A small, frustrated puff of air. The usual. Just want to keep the neighborhood looking sharp. Buddy, it's all about property values. He said it with a big smile. Of course. He always does. He was just being nice. Sarah. I knew it was a lie as soon as I said it. Mark was never just being nice. His kindness was a weapon. Coated in sugar. Every friendly comment was a judgment. Burning the midnight oil again. Liam. Meant you're a terrible husband who's never home. That's a classic car you've got there. Meant your car is a piece of junk. No. He wasn't. Sarah said. Her voice quiet. She turned from the stove. And I saw the disappointment in her eyes. It was a look I was seeing more and more often. He's right. The fence looks awful. The whole house looks neglected. It's embarrassing. I'll get to it this weekend. I promise. I said. The words tasting like ash in my mouth. We both knew it was an empty promise. The Petersons are having a barbecue on Saturday, she said. Changing the subject. But not really. Jessica invited us. She's making that 7-layer dip you like. Great. I mumbled. Another performance. Another evening of smiling and pretending I didn't feel Mark's condescending gaze on my back. Another night of watching Sarah laugh a little too loudly at his jokes, her eyes shining with an admiration she rarely showed me anymore. She used to look at me that way. When we first met, my quiet nature was something she called thoughtful and deep. My dedication to my career was ambitious and driven. Now, my quiet was distant, and my ambition was neglect. Maybe she was right. I had let the job consume me. I had let the gray of my cubicle seep into her home, painting over the vibrant colors of our life together. I saw the problem, but I felt paralyzed, trapped on a treadmill I didn't know how to stop. The thing is, I didn't hate Mark because he was successful. I hated him because he made it look so damn easy. He seemed to have endless time. Time to coach his son's little league team. Time to organize community events. Time to maintain a perfect home. And, apparently, time to monitor the state of my fence. He made me feel like a failure, not just as a homeowner, but as a man. And the worst part was, I could see Sarah starting to agree with him. She talked about him constantly. Mark fixed their sprinkler system all by himself. Mark is taking his family to Florida for a long weekend. Mark. That night, after our tense, mostly silent dinner, I was cleaning up the kitchen. Sarah was in the living room, scrolling on the family tablet. We shared it, mostly for paying bills and streaming movies. I heard her laugh softly at something on the screen. It was a genuine, light sound, one I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. A pang of jealousy, sharp and ugly, hit me. I told myself it was ridiculous. She was probably just watching a funny video. I'm heading up to bed, she said a little while later, setting the tablet down on the coffee table. Don't stay up too late. I won't, I replied. But I did. The house was quiet. The silence pressed in on me. I couldn't focus on the TV. My mind kept replaying the conversation about the fence. The look on Sarah's face. I felt a familiar wave of self-loathing wash over me. She was right. I was letting everything slide. Our home. Our marriage. I wandered into the living room, a restless energy buzzing under my skin. I saw the tablet on the coffee table. Its screen dark. I picked it up, thinking I'd browse the news. Anything to shut my brain off? It was still logged into Sarah's account. Her mail was open. Her social media feed. I had no intention of snooping. Our trust might have been strained, but it wasn't broken. Not yet. I swiped over to the web browser, but my thumb accidentally tapped on the messaging app icon instead. It was a generic one that came with the device, one we never used. We always used the messaging apps on our phones, but a notification badge showed one unread message. Curiosity, that little devil, poked at me. Who would be messaging her on this app? Maybe it was just spam, a wrong number. I opened it. The screen showed a single conversation thread. The contact name was just an initial, M. My heart gave a strange little lurch. The last message was from a few hours ago. It was the one that was still in red. M. Can't stop thinking about this afternoon. You were incredible. I stared at the words. They didn't make sense. It was like reading a foreign language. This afternoon. Sarah had told me she went to the library and then grocery shopping. My mind scrambled, trying to find an innocent explanation. A friend? A wrong message meant for someone else? Then I scrolled up. My breath caught in my throat. The air turned to ice in my lungs. There were dozens of them. Messages stretching back for weeks. M. He has no idea. Does he? Poor guy. Sarah. He's so wrapped up in his own world. He wouldn't notice if the house was on fire. M. Good. More of you for me. Meet me at the usual spot tomorrow. 2 p.m. Sarah, I'll be there. I'm counting the minutes. And then. The one that shattered everything. The one that made the floor fall away from beneath my feet. It was from 2 weeks prior. M. Your fence is an eyesore. By the way. But I guess it gives me a better view into your kitchen. Tell your husband I said hi. M. Maple Creek. Mark. The tablet slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. The sound was deafening in this silent house. It was the sound of my life breaking. The laughter I had heard earlier. The light, happy sound from the living room. She wasn't watching a funny video. She was reading messages from him. From my neighbor. The perfect, smiling, condescending man who judged my lawn while he was sleeping with my wife. A hot, white-hot rage began to build in my chest, burning away the gray numbness and leaving something raw and violent in its place. I wanted to smash something. I wanted to storm out of the house, right across that perfect lawn, and beat down his perfect front door. I wanted to drag him out into the street for the whole perfect neighborhood to see. But I didn't. I just stood there, in the ruins of my quiet living room, shaking. My world hadn't just cracked. It had been detonated. And in the smoking crater where my marriage used to be, a new, cold, and terrifying thought began to form. They thought I was oblivious. They thought I was a sad, pathetic fool. They had underestimated me. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The first 24 hours were a blur of pure, unadulterated rage. I didn't sleep. I paced the downstairs of my house like a caged animal, the tablet clutched in my hand like a holy relic of betrayal. Every message was a fresh stab wound. I reread them until the words burned themselves onto the back of my eyelids. Their casual cruelty. Their little inside jokes. The way they talked about me. Poor guy. He's so wrapped up in his own world. The condescension was suffocating. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had pitied me. That was worse. The next morning, Sarah came downstairs, yawning, looking for all the world like a woman who had slept soundly. "Morning," she said, reaching for the coffee pot. "You're up early." I was standing by the window, looking out at Mark's house. I could see him through his kitchen window, moving with that easy, confident energy he always had. He was probably making a healthy, organic breakfast for his perfect family. I felt a wave of nausea. "Couldn't sleep," I said. My voice was a low growl I barely recognized. She turned, a flicker of concern on her face. "Are you okay? You look terrible." I wanted to scream. I wanted to hold up the tablet and watch the color drain from her face. I wanted to ask her if she was on her way to the usual spot later. The words were right there, bubbling up my throat like acid. But some new, cold instinct held them back. It was the same instinct that had stopped me from storming over to Mark's house the night before. To confront them now would be to play their game. I would be the hysterical, cheated on husband. Liam, the poor guy, finally lost it. They would be the center of the drama, and I would be a pathetic footnote. Sarah would cry. Mark would put on his solemn, concerned face. He'd probably offer me a handshake and say something like, "I'm sorry it came to this." Man, the thought made my blood boil. No, that wasn't justice. That was just noise. So I swallowed the rage. I pushed it down, deep into a cold, dark place inside me. And I said, "Just a lot on my mind with work. Big deadline coming up." It was the perfect excuse. It was the excuse I had used for months to explain my distance, my exhaustion. She accepted it without a second thought. Of course she did. It fit the narrative she and Mark had created for me. I was just the oblivious, overworked husband. For the next week, I lived a double life. By day, I went to my gray cubicle. But the work was a fog. My real work began at night. I became a ghost in my own home. I waited until Sarah was asleep. Then I would creep downstairs and begin my surveillance. I downloaded a keylogger onto the family tablet. It felt slimy. A violation of privacy. But privacy was a luxury I could no longer afford. The trust had been incinerated. The messages kept coming. They were brazen, careless. They planned their trysts in cheap motels on the outskirts of Columbus, always in the afternoons when Mark was supposedly showing properties, and Sarah was supposedly at the gym. I tracked their locations using the tablet's GPS. I watched their digital lives intertwine. They had a shared photo album. Hidden away in a cloud service Sarah had forgotten was linked to the device. The pictures were a gut punch. There they were, Sarah and Mark, laughing in a dimly lit bar, kissing in a parked car. The kind of passionate, reckless kiss we hadn't shared in years. Sarah, wearing a new dress I'd never seen, smiling at him with that look. The look that used to be mine. Each photo was another twist of the knife. I saved them all. I copied them to a secure, encrypted hard drive. My own little arsenal of heartbreak. One afternoon, I called in sick to work. I couldn't stand the thought of them together, laughing at me. I told Sarah I had a stomach bug and stayed in bed. From my upstairs window, I had a clear view of the street. At 1:45 p.m., I watched her get into her car and drive away. 10 minutes later, I watched Mark leave his house, heading in the same direction. The coordination was sickeningly efficient, driven by a masochistic impulse I couldn't control. I got into my own car and followed them. I kept my distance, my heart hammering against my ribs. They met in the parking lot of a generic, Roadside motel. The kind with peeling paint and a flickering vacancy sign. They didn't even look around. They walked straight to room 112. Mark's arm slung casually around her shoulder. He unlocked the door and they disappeared inside. I sat in my car, staring at that closed door, for what felt like an eternity. The rage was back, hotter than ever. All I had to do was get out of the car, walk over to that door, and kick it in. I had the photos. I had the messages. I had them. Right here. Right now. It would be so easy to burn their world down. But as I sat there, a different thought began to crystallize, pushing through the red haze of fury. Burning their world down wasn't enough. Not if my own world burned with it. What would happen after the screaming and the accusations? A messy, public divorce. The neighborhood would gossip. I would be the object of their pity. Sarah the object of their scorn. And Mark would weather it. He was a master of appearances. He'd spin it. He'd be the regretful man who made a terrible mistake. He'd play the victim. Maybe even claim Sarah pursued him. People in Maple Creek loved Mark. They trusted him. Who would they believe? The charming, successful Hoa president? Or the quiet, disgruntled guy with the messy lawn? It wasn't enough to expose the affair. That was just a symptom. The disease was Mark himself. His arrogance. His hypocrisy. The way he built his perfect life on a foundation of judgment and lies. Destroying the affair would only hurt Sarah and me. To truly get justice, I had to destroy him. I had to dismantle the entire facade. Brick by perfect brick. Until all that was left was the rotten core. That was the moment the plan changed. Sitting in that soulless motel parking lot, staring at the door to room 112, my mission shifted. This was no longer about a cheating wife. This was about a man who believed he was untouchable. I started my car and drove away, leaving them to their sordid little afternoon. The anger was still there, but it was different now. It was no longer a wildfire. It was a cold, focused beam of energy. It was fuel. That night, my real investigation began. It was no longer about Sarah and Mark. It was only about Mark. I put the photos and the messages aside. They were my insurance policy. But they weren't the weapon I was going to use. I turned my programming skills to a new, personal project, excavating the life of Mark Peterson. I treated him like a piece of faulty code that needed to be debugged. I started with the basics. Public records. Social media archaeology. He had a squeaky clean digital footprint. His LinkedIn was a monument to his success. His Facebook was a curated gallery of family vacations, charity runs, and glowing client testimonials. He was a master of his own PR. But everyone makes mistakes. Everyone leaves a stray thread. I went deeper. I searched for old usernames, forgotten accounts. I looked into his life before Maple Creek, before Jessica, before real estate. He had grown up in a small town a few hours away, near Toledo. He went to college at Ohio State. Same as me. But a few years earlier. Small world. I spent hours scrolling through old university forums, digital yearbooks, archived articles from the student newspaper. It was tedious, frustrating work. I found nothing. Just the usual stuff: dean's list, fraternity pictures, a mention in an article about a business club. He was as perfect in his past as he was in his present. I was about to give up for the night. It was almost 3 a.m. My eyes were burning from staring at the screen. I felt a familiar sense of hopelessness creep in. Maybe he really was perfect. Maybe this was a fool's errand. Then I found it. It wasn't a big headline. It was a small, buried article in a digitized local paper from a town near the university, dated 10 years ago. The headline was simple: "Hit and run seriously injure student." The article was short on details. A young woman, a promising art student, was struck by a car late one night while riding her bike home from a campus library. The driver fled the scene. The woman's injuries were severe. She was left in critical condition. The police had few leads. A witness gave a vague description of a dark-colored, older model domestic sedan. No license plate. The case went cold. It was nothing. A tragic but unremarkable story. It could have been anyone. But something made me pause. A cold feeling washed over me. I looked at the date of the article again. It was from Mark's senior year of college. The location was just a few miles from the OSU campus. I opened another browser tab and went back to my research folder on Mark. I had saved everything, even the most mundane photos. I scrolled through his old, mostly abandoned MySpace page I had unearthed. The photos were grainy, Low-resolution relics of a bygone internet era. Most were of him and his fraternity brothers, beers in hand. But there was one, tucked away in an album titled Good Times, that made my heart stop. It was a picture of Mark. Younger, cockier, leaning against a car. It was a dark blue, late 90s sedan. His first car. Probably. It was nothing special, except for one tiny detail. On the corner of the rear window, there was a sticker. It was for a small, indie band that had been popular in the Columbus music scene for about 5 minutes 10 years ago. I went back to the news article. There was no mention of a sticker. It was too small a detail for a witness to catch in the dark. It meant nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I opened a news search window. I typed in the name of the young woman from the article. Her name was Ava Chen. The first few results were updates on her condition from 10 years ago. Then nothing. But then I found something more recent. A blog. It was run by a disability rights advocacy group. And there, on the Our Team page, was a picture of a woman in a wheelchair. She had a kind, intelligent face, but her eyes held a profound sadness and a steely resolve. Her name was Ava Chen. Beneath her picture was a short bio. It described her as a passionate advocate for accessibility and a survivor of a life-altering hit-and-run accident a decade ago. I stared at her face, then back at the picture of a young Mark Peterson, smiling smugly next to his car. A dark, horrifying puzzle was starting to take shape in my mind. The pieces were flimsy, circumstantial. A car of the same color and type. A location. A timeline. It wasn't proof, but I knew. In the deepest, coldest part of my gut, I knew. This was it. This was a secret. This was a rot at the core of Mark Peterson's perfect life. He hadn't just cheated on his wife. He hadn't just lied to his neighbors. He had destroyed a life and driven away, leaving a young woman broken on the side of the road while he went on to build his perfect world. The rage was gone now. The jealousy was gone. All that was left was a terrifying clarity. My plan, which had been a vague desire for revenge, now had a name. It had a face. And it had a purpose. I wasn't going to expose an affair. I was going to expose a monster. The discovery of Ava Chen changed everything. It was as if I had been fumbling in a dark room, and suddenly, someone had thrown open a window, flooding the space with a harsh, revealing light. The affair. The lies. The petty neighborhood slights, they all seemed small and insignificant now. They were just ripples on the surface. The hit and run was the colossal stone that had been dropped into the water. My double life intensified. I became a master of deception. A ghost in my own marriage. To Sarah, I was just becoming more withdrawn, more consumed by the big project at work. She seemed to accept it, perhaps even welcomed it. My distance gave her more freedom, more space to live her own secret life. We were like two planets orbiting the same sun, held in place by a shared history, but spinning in opposite, lonely directions. We ate dinner in silence. We went to bed at different times. The emotional chasm between us was now a barren, lifeless canyon. Some nights, I would look at her as she slept and feel a pang of the love I once had, a ghost of a memory. But it was quickly extinguished by the cold reality of what she had done, and what I was now doing. My nights were dedicated to Mark Peterson and Ava Chen. I read every word Ava had ever written on her blog. I learned about her struggle, her recovery, the years of painful physical therapy. I learned about the art career she had lost, the dreams that had been shattered on that dark road. She wrote with a raw, unflinching honesty, but without a trace of self-pity. She wrote about her anger, her frustration, but also about her fight to reclaim her life, to find a new purpose. She was a warrior, and the man who had done this to her was next door, grilling organic chicken and complaining about my overgrown lawn. The injustice of it was a physical weight in my chest. My investigation became an obsession. The circumstantial evidence wasn't enough. A dark sedan in a college town proximity wouldn't hold up. I needed something solid, something undeniable. I needed a link. The band sticker on the car in Mark's old photo was my only real lead. The band was called Flicker and Fade. They were obscure, a classic one-hit wonder of the local scene. Finding that sticker was like finding a needle in a haystack. I spent weeks digging through the digital graveyards of the internet. I scoured old forums for Columbus area music lovers from that era. I searched for archive concert listings, fan pages, anything. Finally, after a dozen dead ends, I hit a paywall. It was an online archive for a defunct alternative newspaper that had heavily covered the local music scene. They had a massive photo gallery, but it was for subscribers only. I didn't hesitate. I paid the $20 fee for a month's access. For 3 nights, I clicked through thousands of grainy, poorly lit concert photos from 10 years ago. My eyes ached. I was looking for a ghost. I was looking for Mark Peterson in a crowd, for any sign he was a fan of this band. And then I saw him. It wasn't a clear shot. He was in the background of a photo of the band on stage, partially obscured by someone else. But it was him. The same arrogant smirk. The same confident posture. He was younger. His hair a little longer. But it was unmistakably Mark. He was wearing a Flicker and Fade t-shirt. I felt a jolt of triumph. So potent it made me dizzy. This was it. This was the link. He wasn't just a guy who happened to own the same kind of car. He was a fan of the band whose sticker was on the car that a witness might have seen. It was still circumstantial, but the threads were weaving together, forming a rope. But the rope wasn't strong enough yet. A photo of him at a concert wasn't proof he was driving the car that night. I needed more. The police report on Ava's accident was a public record, but it was sealed in the archives of a small-town police department hours away. Getting it would be difficult without a direct connection to the case. I kept digging. I focused on Mark's life in the months following the accident. He graduated. He moved away from Columbus almost immediately, taking a job in Cleveland before eventually moving back to the area years later with Jessica. It was a clean break. Too clean. It felt like he was running. My search led me to the social media accounts of his old fraternity brothers. Most were private. But if you were not, I scrolled through years of photos, feeling like a digital voyeur. I was looking for any mention of the accident, any slip-up. I found nothing. Their online lives were a predictable montage of weddings, babies, and golf trips. I was getting frustrated. The trail was going cold. The weight of my secret was starting to wear on me. I was jumpy, irritable. At the neighborhood barbecue Sarah had insisted we attend, I could barely stand to be near Mark. He clapped me on the back, a big, phony smile on his face. "Liam, good to see you, buddy. Heard you've been burning the candle at both ends. You gotta take a break. Life's too short. You know," he said, gesturing around at his perfect backyard, his perfect family. Life's too short. The hypocrisy was so staggering it almost made me laugh. I looked over at Sarah, who was talking with Jessica. She glanced at me and gave a small, tight smile, as if to say, "Please, just try to be normal." The urge to detonate everything, right there on his perfectly manicured lawn, was immense. But I held on to my cold purpose. Not yet. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected place. It wasn't on the internet. It was in my own garage. One Saturday, I was clearing out a corner of the garage, a task I'd been putting off for years. It was where we had dumped all the boxes from our college days that we never got around to unpacking. Tucked away behind a stack of old textbooks, I found my own college yearbooks. On a whim, I brought them inside. I sat at the kitchen table and flipped through the pages, a wave of nostalgia washing over me. And then I saw it. The yearbook was from my senior year. Mark's senior year. I had forgotten we'd overlapped for that 1 year. I wasn't looking for him, but there he was, in the business club section. I turned to the fraternity pages, and there, in the group photo for his house, was a face I recognized from my late-night digital stalking. It was a man named Kevin Riley. I remembered his name because his public Facebook profile was full of overly sentimental posts about his glory days in the fraternity. He seemed like the type who lived in the past. According to his profile, he now lived in Cincinnati and worked in insurance. He seemed like the weakest link. He was the guy who posted Throwback Thursday photos every single week, tagging all his old buddies. Mark never responded to the tags. He was too busy curating his new, perfect life. I stared at Kevin Riley's smiling face in the yearbook. An idea, wild and risky, began to form in my mind. I couldn't approach him as Liam Miller, Mark Peterson's neighbor, but maybe I could approach him as someone else. I created a fake social media profile. I called myself Dave, a generic name. I used a stock photo of a bland, smiling man in his late 30s. My backstory was simple. I was an alumnus from their rival fraternity, a few years younger, now living in Cincinnati and trying to reconnect with people. It was thin, but it might just be plausible enough. I sent Kevin Riley a friend request. He accepted it within an hour. Of course he did. His entire online persona was about collecting friends and reliving the past. I waited a few days, liking a few of his public posts, Then I sent him a message. Hey Kevin. Dave here. Random question for you. You were in Theta Chi, right? I was in the house next door a couple years after you. I'm trying to track down an old buddy of mine. And I have this vague memory he might have known some of your guys. Did you guys ever hang out with a dude named Rick who drove a beat-up blue sedan? Had a sticker for that band Flicker and Fade on the back. I had invented Rick. The bait was the car. And the sticker. I held my breath after I hit send. This was a long shot. A desperate, crazy gamble. He might ignore it. He might call me out. A day went by. Nothing. My heart sank. I had overplayed my hand. Then, 2 nights later, a notification popped up. A message from Kevin Riley. My hands were trembling as I opened it. Hey Dave. Weird question, man. Lol. Don't know any Rick. But funny you mentioned that car. My boy Mark had a ride just like that back in the day. Total piece of junk, but we had some crazy times in it. God. The Flicker and Fade sticker. Haven't thought about that in years. Why you asking? I read the message 3 times. My boy Mark. He had taken the bait. He had placed Mark in the car with the sticker. He had confirmed my single biggest piece of circumstantial evidence. This was the moment. The midpoint. My investigation had been on the verge of collapse. And now, suddenly, the path forward was clear. A cold wave of adrenaline washed over me. I felt a surge of power. A sense of control that I hadn't felt in months. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect. I typed my response carefully, trying to sound casual, nonchalant. No worries, man. Probably just got my wires crossed. Old memories. You know. Thanks anyway. Cheers. I immediately unfriended and blocked Kevin Riley. I deleted the Dave profile, wiping it from existence. I had what I needed. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a smoking gun. But it was a confirmation from a direct source. It was a vital piece of the puzzle. The one that connected the photo of Mark to the card to the sticker. The next step was the most daunting of all. All the digital sleuthing. All the late-night searching that was the easy part. It was anonymous. Safe. Now, I had to step out from behind the screen. I had to contact Ava Chen. Finding Ava Chen was surprisingly easy. She wasn't hiding. On the contrary, she had made it her life's work to be seen. Her advocacy blog was popular, and she had a professional contact email listed. For a full day, I stared at that email address, a blinking cursor on a blank draft. This was a point of no return. The moment I hit send, this secret war of mine would no longer be just mine. It would become real. It would involve a real person. A person whose life had been irrevocably damaged. What right did I have to dredge up the worst moment of her life for my own vengeful purpose? The question gnawed at me. Was I using her trauma as a weapon? The thought made me feel sick. But then I pictured Mark, flipping burgers in his backyard, laughing without a care in the world. I pictured Ava, in her wheelchair, writing about her daily struggles with a strength I couldn't imagine. This wasn't just about my broken marriage anymore. This was about a fundamental imbalance in the universe that needed to be corrected. This was about a man who had built a perfect life on the rubble of someone else's. My revenge was a selfish motive. Yes. But the goal exposing the truth felt righteous. I had to believe that. I composed the email carefully, writing and rewriting it a dozen times. I kept it short, direct, and anonymous. I created a new, encrypted email account. Something untraceable. Subject, information regarding your accident 10 years ago. Dear Ms. Chen, I am writing to you for a sensitive and difficult reason. I am a private individual who, through unrelated research, has come across information that I believe is directly related to the hit-and-run accident that you survived a decade ago. I believe I know the identity of the person who was driving the car that night. I understand that this message will come as a shock, and I am deeply sorry if it causes you any distress. I know the case is cold, but I have gathered evidence that I feel is compelling. I do not want anything from you. My only goal is to see that the truth is brought to light. If you are willing to hear what I have found, please let me know. I am happy to share everything I have with you. No questions asked. Sincerely, a friend of the truth. I read it one last time, my finger hovering over the send button. My heart was pounding. This was the leap. I closed my eyes and clicked. The waiting was excruciating. Every ping from my phone made me jump. I checked the anonymous email account every 10 minutes. A day passed. Then 2. Silence. I started to despair. Maybe she thought it was a cruel prank. Maybe she had moved on and didn't want to reopen that wound. Maybe she had just deleted it. I couldn't blame her if she did. The idea that I had failed, that Mark would get away with it all, was a bitter pill to swallow. Meanwhile, life at home continued its slow, cold decay. Sarah and I were polite strangers living in the same house. The annual Maple Creek block party, Mark's crowning social event of the year, was approaching. The invitations custom printed, of course, on thick cardstock had arrived. Sarah left mine on the kitchen counter without a word. "We have to go," she said later that day. It wasn't a question. It would look weird if we didn't. Look weird to who? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. To everyone, she said, her voice laced with frustration. To the Petersons. Please, Liam, can we just be normal for one night? The irony was a physical blow. She wanted us to pretend to be normal at the home of the man she was sleeping with. The man who had crippled a woman and gotten away with it. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Fine, I said. The word clipped. We'll go. In my mind, a new timeline began to form. The party. It was the perfect stage. It was Mark's triumphant celebration of his own perfect world. What better place to watch that world burn? On the third day, I got a reply. My hands shook as I opened the email. It was from Ava. To a friend of the truth. I don't know who you are, or if this is some kind of sick joke, but in the 10 years since my accident, you are the first person to ever contact me with a potential lead. I have to know. I will not meet you in person. We can do a video call. If you are serious, send me your evidence first. I will review it. If I think it's credible, we will talk. Ava Chen. Her message was cautious, guarded, but it was a yes. It was a door creaking open. I spent the next hour compiling everything I had found into a single, password-protected file. The old news articles, the picture of Mark with his car, the picture of him at the concert, the transcript of my conversation with Kevin Riley, with his name redacted to protect my methods. I wrote a cover letter, laying out the timeline, connecting the dots as clearly and logically as I could. I hit send. Another 24 hours of agonizing silence passed. I was a wreck. I barely ate. I paced. I imagined her reading it, picking apart my flimsy case, seeing it as the desperate fantasy of a lunatic. The reply came late the next night. I was in my home office. The glow of the monitor the only light in the room. The email subject was just one word when. We scheduled the call for the following evening. I made sure Sarah would be out, attending a book club meeting. At the appointed time, I sat at my desk, my webcam on, my stomach in knots. A notification popped up on my screen. Ava Chen is calling. I clicked accept. Her face appeared on my screen. It was the same face from the blog, but seeing her in motion, alive, was different. She looked directly into the camera, her expression unreadable. She was in what looked like a home office. Shelves of books behind her. Hello, she said. Her voice was steady, clear. Hello, Ms. Chen. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me. You can call me Ava, she said. And you are. For now, I need to remain anonymous. I said. I hope you can understand. She nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. I've reviewed what you sent me. It's a lot to process. I know, I said softly. This man, she said, her voice tight with control. Mark Peterson. You're sure about him? I'm as sure as I can be without a confession, I said. I walked her through my entire investigation, from the first discovery of the news article to the conversation with his fraternity brother. I explained how the timelines matched up, how he had left town right after graduation, how he was a documented fan of the obscure band whose sticker was on the car. She listened without interruption, her gaze intense. She was processing every word, every detail. When I finished, she was silent for a long time. I could see the emotions warring on her facetious disbelief, anger, a deep, 10-year-old pain rising to the surface. For 10 years, she finally said, her voice trembling slightly. I have wondered, who could do that? Who could hit someone, see them lying on the road, and just drive away? I imagined a monster, a drug addict, a hardened criminal. I never imagined him. She gestured vaguely, as if to encompass the idea of a man like Mark, a successful man, a family man, someone living a normal life in the suburbs. The best monsters are the ones that hide in plain sight, I said quietly. She looked down for a moment, composing herself. When she looked up again, The steel was back in her eyes. What you found, it's more than the police ever had. The sticker, I remember something. A flash of light on the back window as a car sped away. I told the police it might have been a sticker, but it was so fast. They dismissed it. My blood ran cold. It was real. It was all real. What do you want to do, Ava? I asked. What do you mean? We could take this to the police, I said. It might be enough to get them to reopen the case, but a good lawyer could probably tear it apart. It's circumstantial. So what's the alternative? She asked, her eyes narrowing. She knew I had a plan. She was smart. She knew I hadn't done all this just to hand it over to the authorities. I took a deep breath. He's having a party. I told her about the annual Maple Creek block party. I described the scene, the whole neighborhood gathered on his lawn, celebrating him, his success, his perfect life. I told her it was his stage, the place where his public persona was at its most powerful. And you want me to, what? Show up? She asked, a hint of disbelief in her voice. I want you to confront him, I said. Not with lawyers and police reports. Not at first. I want you to confront him in front of his world, in front of his wife, his children, his adoring neighbors. I want them to see who he really is, not told through a legal document, but from you, from the woman whose life he destroyed. It was a terrible thing to ask. I was asking her to turn her deepest trauma into a public spectacle. She was silent for a long time, staring at something beyond the camera. I could see the gears turning in her mind. I had expected her to refuse, to be horrified by the idea. But when she spoke, her voice was cold and clear as ice. He took my life from me, she said. He went on to build a perfect one while I had to learn how to live in a world that wasn't built for me. He never had to face a single consequence. You're right. A police report isn't enough. An anonymous tip isn't enough. He needs to see me. He needs to look me in the eye and account for what he did. She looked back at me, her gaze piercing. When is the party? Next Saturday, I said. My voice barely a whisper. Send me the address, Ava said. I'll be there. The call ended. I sat in the darkness, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The plan was in motion. The final piece was in place. For weeks, I had been the sole keeper of this terrible secret. Now, I had an ally, an avenging angel in a wheelchair, and together, we were going to bring judgment to Maple Creek. The week leading up to the block party was the longest week of my life. It was a strange, surreal period of calm before the storm. The plan was set. All the pieces were in place. There was nothing left for me to do but wait and play my part, the quiet, defeated husband. Outwardly, I maintained my facade. I went to work. I came home. I nodded politely to Mark when he waved from across his perfect lawn. He was in full party prep mode. A large, commercial-grade tent was delivered and erected in his backyard. Strings of festive lights were meticulously wound around the trees. I watched him, directing the delivery men, pointing and smiling, a general surveying his domain before a great victory. He had no idea he was preparing the stage for his own execution. The thought gave me a grim, cold satisfaction. Sarah was a bundle of nervous energy. She was determined that we make a good impression. I bought you a new shirt, she said on Thursday, holding up a crisp blue polo. The one you usually wear is so faded. Thanks, I said, taking it from her. The fabric felt foreign in my hands. It was a costume for a play I no longer wanted to be in. And please, Liam, she added, her voice pleading, try to have a good time. Or at least pretend to. For me. For you? I wanted to laugh. Or for him. So he doesn't think his prize isn't happy? But I just nodded. I'll try. My communication with Ava was minimal and secure. We exchanged a few encrypted emails to coordinate the timing. She was practical. All business. She told me she had consulted with a lawyer not to press charges yet, but to understand her rights. The lawyer had advised her that a public confrontation was risky, but agreed that in the absence of hard evidence, it might be the only way to force a confession or at least an admission. He had a police contact on standby, ready to act if Mark incriminated himself. Ava was leaving nothing to chance. She was not just an instrument of my revenge. She was a force of nature in her own right. The night before the party, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Sarah's steady breathing beside me. This was the last night of our life as we knew it. After tomorrow, everything would be different. The lies would be out in the open. Not just the lie of her affair, but the colossal lie of the man she had chosen over me. Did I feel any regret? Any desire to turn back? I searched myself for any flicker of doubt, but found none. The man I had been 6 weeks agasad, tired husband who just wanted his wife to love him again was gone. He had been burned away in the fire of her betrayal. In his place was someone colder, harder, more resolute. My marriage was already dead. Sarah had killed it in a cheap motel room with Mark Peterson. I was just signing the death certificate. Saturday arrived. A perfect, sunny, late summer day. The kind of day that belonged on a postcard for suburban living. The party was set to start at 4 p.m. all day. The neighborhood buzzed with anticipation. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and, soon, of barbecue smoke. Sarah spent an hour getting ready. She put on a new sundress, styled her hair, and applied her makeup with care. She looked beautiful, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of loss so sharp it almost took my breath away. This was the woman I had promised to spend my life with, and I was about to detonate her world. But then I remembered the messages, the casual cruelty, the pity. The feeling vanished, replaced by a cold resolve. How do I look? She asked, twirling slightly. You look great, Sarah, I said, and I meant it. She looked like the perfect wife for the perfect neighbor. We walked over at 4:30. The party was already in full swing. The music was upbeat, the drinks were flowing, and the lawn was crowded with the smiling, sun-kissed residents of Maple Creek. It was everything I despised, a pageant of suburban perfection. Mark saw us arrive and broke away from a conversation to greet us. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive-looking linen shirt, his smile a flash of white teeth. He put one arm around Sarah's shoulder in a gesture that was both friendly and proprietary. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Sarah, Liam, so glad you could make it. He boomed, his voice full of false bonhomie. He gave my shoulder a patronizing squeeze. Take a break from all that work. Eh, buddy? Wouldn't miss it, I said, my voice flat. Sarah, however, was beaming. She slipped easily into the role of the charming neighbor, laughing at Mark's joke, her body language open and familiar. Watching them together, so comfortable, so casual in their deception, erased any lingering doubts I might have had. They deserved this. I mumbled an excuse about getting a drink and escaped. I didn't get a drink. I found a spot on the edge of the patio, near the shadows, and I watched. I was a spectator at my own life's demolition. I watched Sarah mingle, laughing and chatting. I watched Mark play the gracious host, the king of the castle. I saw his wife, Jessica, refilling a bowl of chips, smiling at everyone, completely oblivious. A wave of pity for her washed over me. She was a victim in this too, perhaps the most innocent of all. For the next hour, I drifted through the party like a ghost. I made small talk with a few neighbors, my mind a million miles away. My phone was a dead weight in my pocket. I had sent Ava a simple text message 20 minutes ago. It's time. Her reply had been just as simple, on my way. 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes stretched into an eternity. My heart hammered against my ribs. My palms were sweaty. I kept glancing towards the street, my senses on high alert. Every passing car made me flinch. Mark gathered everyone in the backyard for a toast. It was an annual tradition. He stood on a small, makeshift stage near the grill, a microphone in his hand. The crowd quieted down, turning their faces towards him. Hey, everyone. Hey, he said, his voice amplified by the speaker system. I just want to thank you all for coming. It's looking out at all of you, my friends, my neighbors. That reminds me what this is all about. He paused for dramatic effect. Sarah was looking up at him, her eyes shining with admiration. I wanted to vomit. It's about community. He continued. It's about looking out for each other. It's about creating a place that is safe, a place built on trust, where our kids can grow up and we can all feel secure. That's the Maple Creek way. So let's raise a glass to good neighbors and a great community. A cheer went up from the crowd. Glasses clinked. People clapped. The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it. A place built on trust. I felt a laugh, dark and bitter, rise in my throat. But I choked it down. And then, I saw it. Over the heads of the crowd, through the gaps between the manicured shrubs, I saw a vehicle pull up to the curb in front of Mark's house. It wasn't a car. It was a dark gray van. the kind modified for wheelchair accessibility. It stopped right at the end of Mark's driveway. My blood turned to ice. It was happening. Nobody else had noticed yet. They were all still basking in the glow of Mark's beach, sipping their drinks, laughing. I began to move. I slipped away from my spot in the shadows and started walking, not towards the van, but towards the front of the house, taking a path along the side of the garage. I needed to be there. I needed to see it all. As I reached the front yard, the side door of the van slid open with a quiet electronic hum. A ramp lowered onto the sidewalk. And then, she appeared. Ava Chen. She navigated her wheelchair down the ramp with a practiced efficiency. She was wearing simple black pants and a plain white blouse. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face. She looked small but radiated an aura of immense, unshakable strength. Her expression was calm, her gaze fixed on the party, on the happy sound spilling out from the backyard. She saw me standing there. Our eyes met for a brief moment across a perfect green lawn. There was no fear in her eyes, only resolve. I gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. This was her moment. She began to move, her hands expertly guiding the wheels of her chair up the pristine concrete driveway, straight towards the heart of the party. The sound of the small electric motor on her chair was a low hum, a prelude to the coming chaos. She was the bomb, and I had just lit the fuse. I stayed in the front yard, a silent witness. My part in this was over. Now, I would just watch the fallout. The party's cheerful noise was a bubble, and Ava Chen was a needle about to pierce it. She moved up the driveway with a quiet, relentless purpose. A few people near the front of the house turned to the soft whir of her wheelchair. Their smiles faltered, replaced by looks of polite confusion. A stranger in a wheelchair, arriving alone, wasn't part of the usual block party script. I watched as the ripples of her presence spread through the crowd. Conversations closest to her trickled to a halt. Heads turned. A path began to clear for her, not out of courtesy, but out of sheer, unnerved curiosity. The happy jazz music still played from the speakers, but it now sounded tinny and absurd, a soundtrack to a scene that was rapidly curdling. Mark was still on his makeshift stage, basking in the applause, his back to the driveway. He hadn't seen her yet, but Jessica, his wife, had. She was standing near the patio, and I saw her brow furrow. She took a step forward, her hostess instincts kicking in. "Can I help you?" she called out, her voice friendly but questioning. Ava didn't answer her. She didn't even look at her. Her eyes were locked on the back of one man. Mark. Sarah saw her then. I watched my wife's face. She registered the stranger, the wheelchair, the sudden, awkward silence falling over the yard. She glanced around, a flicker of social anxiety on her face, wondering what was happening, why the perfect party atmosphere was suddenly evaporating. She had no idea. She was just another spectator, moments away from the demolition of her own carefully constructed fantasy. Finally, Mark seemed to sense a shift in the crowd's energy. The applause had died too quickly. The silence was too profound. He turned, a slightly puzzled smile still on his face. "Is everything all right?" He stopped. The words died in his throat. He saw Ava. I watched him from my vantage point in the front yard, and it was like watching a statue crack. For a split second, there was nothing on his face, just blank incomprehension. Then, recognition dawned. It wasn't a sudden flash. It was a slow, sickening wave that washed over him, draining every ounce of color from his handsome, tanned face. The confident smile dissolved. The easy posture vanished. His shoulders slumped, and a look of pure, primal fear entered his eyes. It was the look of a man who had just seen a ghost. His ghost, the microphone, still clutched in his hand, slipped from his numb fingers and hit the stage with a loud thud, followed by a squeal of feedback that made everyone jump. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent yard. Every eye was on them now. On Mark, frozen on his stage, and on Ava, who had stopped her chair in the center of the lawn, creating a gravitational point around which the entire party now revolved. Jessica rushed to her husband's side. Mark, what is it? Who is this?" she asked, her voice filled with a genuine, panicked concern. She put a hand on his arm, but he didn't seem to feel it. He couldn't take his eyes off Ava. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. I could feel my own heart beating in my ears. This was it. The moment of impact. Ava broke the silence. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was perfectly clear. cutting through the stunned air with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. She didn't need a microphone. "Hello, Mark," she said. The sound of his name, spoken by her, seemed to jolt him. He flinched as if he'd been struck. "You don't recognize me, do you?" she continued, her voice steady, almost conversational. It was a terrifyingly calm sound. "It's been a while. 10 years. To be exact. You look good. Successful." Jessica stared back and forth between her husband's ashen face and the calm woman in the wheelchair. "Mark, what is she talking about?" Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He just shook his head slightly. A pathetic, reflexive denial. From across the lawn, I saw Sarah. Her face was a mask of utter confusion. She was looking at Mark, then at the woman, then back at Mark. She was trying to piece it together, trying to understand the nightmare that was unfolding in front of her. She looked over and her eyes found me, standing alone by the side of the house. I met her gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't show any emotion at all. I just watched her, and in that moment, I think she began to understand. Not the whole truth, but the most important part. This was not a coincidence. This was my doing. Ava gave a small, sad smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "I suppose I've changed a bit more than you have," she said, gesturing down at her wheelchair. "You were driving a dark blue sedan. An old one. It had a sticker on the back window. For a band. Flicker and fade. Do you remember now, Mark?" A collective gasp went through the crowd. The mention of the car. The sticker, it was too specific. This wasn't a random crazy person. This was real. Mark stumbled back a step, his eyes wide with panic. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. The words weak, unconvincing. "You're mistaken. You have the wrong person." "Do I?" Ava's voice was still quiet, but it now held a core of steel. "I remember the sound of the engine as you sped up. I remember the flash of your headlights in my eyes. And I remember lying on the cold pavement, unable to move, watching your tail lights disappear into the darkness. You never even slowed down. You left me there to die, Mark." The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. "You left me there to die." The whisper started then, a low murmur that swept through the crowd like a contagion. People were looking at Mark differently. The admiration was gone, replaced by suspicion, by horror. His perfect image, so carefully constructed over years, was shattering in real time. Jessica looked at her husband, her face crumbling with dawning horror and disbelief. "Mark, tell me she's lying. Tell me this is a mistake." But Mark couldn't answer. He was trapped. He was standing on his stage of lies, exposed by a truth he thought he had buried a decade ago. He looked around wildly, at the faces of his neighbors, his friends. He saw their judgment, their shock. He saw everything he had built his life upon turning to ash. And then his eyes landed on me. He stared at me, his panicked gaze locking with my cold, steady one. And in his eyes, I saw the final piece click into place for him. He understood. He understood the neglected fence, my quiet resentment, my withdrawn presence. It wasn't about the affair. The affair was just the key I had used to unlock this much darker room. He saw that I had found his real sin. I hadn't come to his party to expose his infidelity. I had come to his party to unmake him. The look on his face was no longer just fear. It was the pure, unadulterated terror of a man who has been completely and utterly outplayed. He had thought he was a predator, and I was a pathetic prey. He had just realized, far too late, that he had been my prey all along. Ava wasn't finished. She had one last thing to say. She looked away from Mark and addressed his wife, her voice softening with something that sounded like genuine pity. "I'm sorry, Jessica," she said. "I truly am. But for 10 years, he has been living this life with you. This perfect life. And for 10 years, I've been living with what he did to me. The truth has a way of coming out. It just took a little longer this time." Just then, a car, a standard police cruiser, turned onto the street and pulled up quietly behind Ava's van. It didn't turn on its lights or siren. A uniformed officer and a plainclothes detective got out. They didn't rush in. They just stood there, watching. Their presence a confirmation of the gravity of the situation. Ava's lawyer had done his job. The sight of the police car broke the spell. The party was over. It dissolved into chaos. People started to leave, grabbing their children, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid excitement. They averted their eyes from Mark, whispering to each other as they hurried away. They didn't want to be associated with the wreckage. The detective began walking up the driveway, calm and methodical. Mark Peterson, the king of Maple Creek, just stood there on his stage, a broken man in a ridiculously expensive shirt, surrounded by the ruins of his perfect life. The jazz music was still playing softly from the speakers, a final, mocking touch to the perfect day that had turned into his personal hell. The aftermath was a strange and hollow silence. The detective, a man with tired eyes named Miller, an irony that wasn't lost on me, spoke in low, calm tones. He didn't arrest Mark on the spot. He simply separated him from Jessica, who had collapsed into a patio chair, sobbing uncontrollably. He asked Mark to come down to the station to give a statement. It was a request, but it had the weight of a command. Mark, stripped of all his bluster and charm, just nodded numbly, his face a gray, empty mask. He was led to the cruiser like a man walking in a dream. I watched Sarah through it all. She stood frozen near the wilting buffet table, her face pale with shock. Her perfect afternoon, her affair with the confident, successful man, had imploded. The man she admired, the man she had risked her marriage for, wasn't just an adulterer. He was something far worse. A monster in a linen shirt. Her eyes kept darting from the police car to the weeping Jessica, to Ava, who sat quietly in her wheelchair, a silent, powerful monument to the truth. Finally, Sarah's gaze settled on me. She walked towards me, her steps unsteady on the manicured grass. The other neighbors had vanished, leaving the three of us, Sarah, Ava, and me, in the wreckage of the Petersons' backyard. You, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of awe and horror. This was you. All of it. I didn't deny it. He had it coming, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. But how? She stammered. How did you know? You left the tablet on the coffee table, Sarah, I said simply. The color drained completely from her face. The affair, the messages, it all seemed so trivial to me now. But to her, it was the first domino. She finally understood the scope of my knowledge, the depth of my deception. She realized that for weeks, I had been watching, listening, and plotting, all while she thought I was just the sad, oblivious husband. She looked at me as if she were seeing a stranger, and perhaps she was. I'm going to go, Ava said, her voice pulling us out of our toxic bubble. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. Thank you? No, I said, shaking my head. Thank you, Ava, for your courage. She gave a small, weary nod. She maneuvered her chair back down the driveway, where the uniformed officer helped her with the ramp to her van. She didn't look back. She had done what she came to do. She had reclaimed her story. As she drove away, a profound sense of finality washed over me. The war was over. Sarah and I walked back to our house in complete silence. The 20 yards of lawn that separated our properties felt like a vast, unbridgeable desert. Our house, with its peeling fence and patchy grass, looked exactly the same, but everything inside it was different. We had left as a married couple, feigning normality. We returned as strangers bound together by a shared disaster. Inside, she finally broke. My God, Liam, she sobbed, sinking onto the sofa. A hit and run. He left her, oh my God. Her tears weren't for our marriage. Not yet. They were tears of pure, unadulterated shock at the true nature of the man she had been sleeping with. She had been betrayed not just by a cheating husband, but by her own judgment. She had hitched her fantasy to a monster. I didn't comfort her. I didn't have it in me. I just stood there, feeling empty. The cold, driving purpose that had fueled me for weeks was gone, and in its place was a vast, quiet exhaustion. I had won. I had demolished Mark Peterson. I had achieved the ultimate revenge. But there was no triumph. There was no joy. There was just this quiet. The next few days were a blur. The news spread through Maple Creek like a virus. The story was too juicy, too shocking to be contained. The perfect Hoa president, the pillar of the community, was a suspect in a decade-old felony hit and run. The whispers were everywhere. We read the grocery store, the post office, the school drop-off line. The Petersons' house went dark. The festive lights were taken down. A for sale sign appeared on the perfect lawn a week later, pounded into the ground by a stranger from a rival real estate agency. Mark, it turned out, confessed. Faced with Ava's testimony, The corroborating evidence from Kevin Riley, who the police had promptly interviewed, and the public humiliation. He broke. He admitted everything. His lawyer was now trying to negotiate a plea bargain. But the damage was done. His career was over. His reputation was obliterated. His family was destroyed. Jessica had taken the kids and moved out, staying with her sister in another state. My revenge was complete. It was surgical. It was absolute. And I felt nothing. Sarah and I existed in a state of limbo. The anger between us had burned out, leaving only ashes. We talked. Finally. Not about the affair. Not at first. We talked about Mark. About Ava. It was safer territory. I can't believe I didn't see it, Sarah said one evening, staring into a cup of tea. The arrogance. The way he thought he was better than everyone. I thought it was confidence. I thought it was attractive. She looked up at me. Her eyes filled with a sad, desperate need for understanding. He paid attention to me. Liam. He said all the right things. He made me feel seen. You were so distant, so lost in your work. I was lonely. It was the first time she had tried to explain herself. Not as an excuse, but as a reason. The old Liam would have gotten angry, defensive. He would have pointed out that his work was for us, for our future. But the old Liam was gone. I know, I said. And I did. I saw my own part in it now. I had let the gray of my job seep into our home. I had retreated into myself, leaving a vacuum that a man like Mark was only too happy to fill. It didn't excuse what she did. But for the first time, I understood it. We finally talked about the affair. There were no shouts, no accusations, just a profound and terrible sadness. The trust was gone, shattered into a million pieces. And we both knew, without having to say it, that it could never be put back together. Our marriage wasn't a broken bone that could be set and healed. It was a terminal illness. We were just waiting for the official time of death. I'm so sorry, Liam, she said, tears streaming down her face. They were real tears this time. Not for the loss of her lover, but for the loss of us. For everything. I'm sorry too, I said. And I meant it. I was sorry for my distance. Sorry for my neglect. Sorry that things had gotten so bad that she had felt the need to look for comfort elsewhere. And I was sorry that my response had been to orchestrate such a devastating, all-consuming revenge. I had set out to destroy Mark Peterson. And I had succeeded. But the blast radius had been wider than I'd anticipated. A week later, we sat at the kitchen table with a stack of papers between us. Divorce documents. It was surprisingly civil. Heartbreakingly amicable. We agreed on how to divide our things. How to sell the house. There was nothing left to fight over. As I was packing my things into boxes, I found the encrypted hard drive. The one with all the evidence of the affair. The photos of her and Mark. The screenshots of their messages. The arsenal I had so meticulously collected. I had never used it. I had never even mentioned it to her. It was the weapon I'd chosen not to fire. I took the hard drive out to the garage, put it on the concrete floor, and shattered it with a hammer. It felt like the final act. It wasn't about forgiving her. It was about letting go of the anger. The anger had served its purpose. It had fueled my investigation. It had given me the strength to see it through. But carrying it any longer would only poison me. I was moving out first. Into a small apartment downtown. Closer to work. A fresh start. The last box was in my car. I stood in the doorway of the house we had bought together, filled with so much hope, and looked at Sarah. Take care of yourself, Liam, she said. Her voice small. You too, Sarah, I replied. I walked to my car without looking back. As I drove away from Maple Creek for the last time, I glanced in my rearview mirror. I saw our house, and next to it, the now empty Peterson house with the for sale sign on the lawn. To broken homes. Side by side. I hadn't gotten my marriage back. I hadn't even tried. But as I merged onto the highway, heading towards the city skyline, I realized what I had gotten back. In the quiet solitude of my car, with the wreckage of my old life behind me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I had lost a wife, a home, a life I thought I wanted. But I had found something I lost along the way. Something Mark and Sarah had almost taken from me for good, my self-respect. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. 3 months passed. The autumn leaves turned from green to gold to a brittle brown, carpeting the sidewalks of downtown Columbus. I lived in a small, one-bedroom apartment on the 7th floor of an old brick building. My view was no longer of Mark Peterson's oppressively perfect lawn, but of a sprawling cityscape, a living, breathing organism of lights and traffic and distant sirens. It was loud and imperfect, and I loved it. My life became simple. I worked, but I no longer let work consume me. I left the office at 5. I learned to cook again, not just microwaving frozen meals, but actually chopping vegetables and following recipes. The small, repetitive motions were therapeutic. I bought a second-hand bicycle and started exploring the city's network of river trails. On the weekends, I was rediscovering the person I was before the move to Maple Creek. Before the pressure, before the betrayal, the gray that had saturated my world was slowly being replaced by color. I didn't feel happy. Not yet. But I felt present. I felt real. I had no contact with Sarah beyond a few logistical emails about the sale of the house. I knew she had moved into a small condo on the other side of town, and had started teaching full-time again. We were living parallel lives of recovery, and I found myself hoping, in a detached way, that she would be okay. One Tuesday morning, as I was drinking my coffee and scrolling through the local news on my laptop, a headline caught my eye. Former real estate agent sentenced in decade-old hit-and-run case. My heart gave a familiar lurch. I clicked on the link. There was a picture of Mark, a recent mugshot. He looked gaunt, haunted. The arrogant gleam in his eyes was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out emptiness. The article was brief. He had been sentenced to 7 years in a state penitentiary for aggravated vehicular assault and leaving the scene of an accident. With parole, he would likely serve for 5. 7 years. It didn't feel like enough for a lifetime of pain he had caused Ava. But it wasn't nothing. It was a real, tangible consequence. His name would forever be linked not to his real estate success or his community leadership, but to this crime. His perfect legacy was now a permanent stain. I closed the laptop, a chapter slamming shut in my mind. There was no pleasure in it, only a quiet, somber finality. Justice, it turned out, wasn't a triumphant explosion. It was the slow, methodical grinding of gears. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Sarah. I saw the news. I guess that's it then. I stared at the message for a long time before typing my reply. I guess so. A moment later, another message came through. The house officially sold. The closing was this morning. The money should be in your account by tomorrow. Okay. Thanks for letting me know. I wrote. There was a long pause. I thought that would be the end of it. But then, one final message appeared. For what it's worth. Liam, I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope you can be happy. The sincerity of it caught me off guard. It was a peace offering. A final, white flag waved across the battlefield of our marriage. You too, Sarah. I typed. And I meant it. We were both survivors of a wreck, just in different ways. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Ava. The news of the sentencing must have affected her more than anyone. Driven by a need for closure I didn't fully understand, I navigated to her blog for the first time in months. I was half afraid of what I might find danger. Bitterness. A cry of victory. But there was a new post, published just an hour before. The title was simple, On Justice. I began to read. She didn't mention Mark by name. She called him the driver. She wrote about the 7-year sentence, acknowledging that no amount of prison time could give her back the use of her legs, or erase a decade of pain. But then the post shifted. It wasn't about him at all. It was about her. For 10 years, she wrote, I carried a ghost with me. The ghost of a faceless man in a speeding car. I gave him so much power. I let his anonymous act of cowardice define the narrative of my life. But he's no longer a ghost. He's just a man. A weak, frightened man who made a terrible choice and spent a decade hiding from it. And in seeing him for what he is, I have found that I am free of him. She wrote about the concept of justice. How it wasn't about an eye for an eye. For her, justice wasn't the number of years he would spend behind bars. Justice was the truth being spoken aloud. Justice was his perfect facade being torn down. Not by rage, but by reality. The final paragraph hit me the hardest. I don't know if I forgive him. She wrote, perhaps forgiveness is too simple a word for something so complex. But I do feel something that surprises me, a sliver of pity. I pity a man so terrified of imperfection that he would leave a person to die on the side of a road, rather than face the consequences of a mistake. His prison was not built of steel and concrete. It was the prison of the perfect life he had to maintain every single day. His sentence may have started today, but he has not been a free man for a very long time. My own freedom, however, is just beginning. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the screen illuminating my small, quiet apartment. Her words were a gift. She had taken the ugly, violent act of my revenge and refined it into something pure. She had found a grace in the wreckage that I never could have. It was never my story to begin with. I was just the catalyst. The story was always hers. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the endless constellation of city lights. Down below, life turned on in all its messy, complicated, beautiful glory. I thought about the house in Maple Creek, now empty, waiting for a new family to move in. I thought about the white picket fence I was always meaning to paint. It was a symbol of everything I thought I wanted, everything I was supposed to be. A perfect husband in a perfect house in a perfect neighborhood. But perfection is a lie. It's a cage. Mark had been its prisoner. Sarah had been its supplicant. And I had been its casualty. My new life was far from perfect. My apartment was small. I ate dinner alone most nights. My future was a blank, unwritten page. And it was the most liberating feeling in the world. I had stopped trying to keep up with the Petersons. I was no longer the sad, tired man next door. I wasn't the vengeful husband or the master plotter. I was just Liam. And in the quiet of my imperfect life, for the first time, that felt like more than enough.